Hey guys, it's Rob Grant here, aka the Orphic Creative, and I just received this invitation to play at a festival. Woo! So it's actually a DJ set, but my plan is to incorporate some kind of cool live element type stuff to go along in between the DJing. So I'm going to have to think about it quite carefully, because normally I would take keyboards and controllers and stands and God knows what else to make it all sound cool. But in this particular case, there's probably not going to be a lot of space in the DJ booth. So I'm going to have to really pare things down to the absolute minimum. So I'm going to take you through that process of kind of figuring out what I'm going to use and coming up with some cool ideas. And we'll see what we come up with. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing to do is to figure out what equipment I'm going to be using. Now, normally when I do a DJ set, I use my laptop and a controller. Normally either this Pioneer GH3, which is pretty small and nifty, or I use this Pioneer SB2, which has quite a few more features on it. It's quite nice for club DJing, but of course it is quite bulky and large. So I think in this particular case, I'm going to go for the SB2. It is missing a few features which would be nice to have, but it's quite small and portable, and I'm actually really used to using this because this is the controller I use when I do wedding DJing. Then I'm going to need some production stuff. So normally when I'm doing a live performance, I use Ableton Live and a keyboard along with a launch pad and this MIDI mix controller. Now that's fine when you've got the time and the space to set it all up, but in this particular case, I think I'm going to only have very limited amount of desk space. And additionally, I might actually be mixing in alongside the previous DJ. So setting up loads of keyboards and controllers and equipment and God knows what else while he's trying to work, it's just going to make me very unpopular. Nobody wants to be that guy. So sacrifices are going to have to be made. The first thing, which is definitely not going to work, is a full-size keyboard. The smallest keyboard that I have is this Novation X Station, which is pretty bulky, and it also needs a stand as well. That's just really not going to work at a festival, so that is going to be out of the question. I do, however, have this Korg Nano Key, which is basically a text keyboard based instrument. It's not the greatest, it's not particularly amazing to play, not going to be doing any virtuoso solos on that, but it will be enough to play in a melody line or some chords, and it's a lot easier to play than a launch pad when you're trying to play a pitched instrument. So that's going to go in the bag. Now I have to decide what to do about my controllers, and this is a bit of a tough one because the Launchpad and the MIDI mix are both pretty integral to my performances. I use the Launchpad for starting and stopping clips and playing in drum samples, and the MIDI mix I use for arming tracks, adjusting volume controls, and also I map parameters to these little knobs at the top here. So I kind of need them both really. I can do some of the stuff that I do with the MIDI mix using the Launchpad, but it involves switching backwards and forwards between multiple pages, which is pretty slow and also introduces the chance of me making a mistake and embarrassing myself on stage. So I'd rather not do that if I don't have to. But since I will already have a laptop, a DJ controller, and the Korg Nano Key, I can't really afford the space to take two controllers with me, and also I'm going to start running out of USB ports unless I take a hub which needs a power source, and this is starting to get way overcomplicated. So there's only one thing for it, I think. This is an Ableton Push. It's a Push 1, not a Push 2, but that meant that I could pick this one up for second-hand prices without having to sell my cat again. Just kidding, I don't have a cat anymore. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with what an Ableton Push is. It has been around for quite a few years now. But in case you're not, it's essentially a launch pad on steroids. You can launch your clips using these lovely buttons here. You can also use them as a drum pad or play it like an instrument. You can also use it as a step sequencer. Then you've also got these knobs at the top here, which can be mapped to all sorts of different parameters. You've got a nice slidey thing on the sides. You can adjust tempo. You can change the length of your clips. God, there's pretty much nothing you can't do on here. Essentially, the whole point of the Push is to take your focus away from the laptop screen and onto an actual instrument. And essentially, you should be able to do most, if not all, of your tasks in Live just using this. So my plan of action was to use the Ableton Push to replace my old Launchpad and my MIDI mix controller, because in theory I should be able to do everything that I do on these two things on here, which technically is true. But when I actually started practicing and messing around with the format that I was going to use, I actually realized that I was going about things the wrong way. So I kept running into a problem, which is that when I was using the DJ software and then I wanted to transition to doing something in Live, I had to first make sure that the BPMs were completely matched up, which that in itself is not too difficult because you can see what the BPM is in the DJ software and you can then just set Ableton Live's BPM to be the same. But what's more of a problem is that you have to make sure that Ableton is also on the first beat of every bar in sync with the DJ software. So when you launch a clip, it'll start at the beginning of the next bar, and if your first beat of the bar is different to the first beat of the bar in the DJ software, then it's just going to sound like a mess and it's just not going to line up properly at all. And that actually is really difficult to do on the fly because you have to keep stopping and starting Ableton, and if you don't start it at exactly the right moment, then it's going to be like slightly out. So you might have the same BPM, but the two tracks might be slightly out of alignment, so then it just sounds terrible. It just becomes a nightmare pretty quickly. So I realized that I was just going about this completely the wrong way. Rather than trying to sync up two bits of software and having all of the potential issues with that, why not just DJ in Ableton Live? So I did some research and I realized that actually quite a lot of people do actually DJ in Ableton Live, and it's actually quite a good bit of software for DJing. It was not really designed for that specifically, but it does lend itself to it quite well, and it has a few features which do make it quite easy. Now, because I'd made the decision to just DJ in Ableton Live, that meant I could get rid of my DJ controller. However, this Ableton Push only has this one little line of controllers on it, which for DJing is just not quite enough because you need to be able to adjust volume levels, bass and treble levels, and various other effects as well. So I decided to reinstate my MIDI mix controller because you've got these volume sliders at the bottom, which are very handy, and you can also assign these knobs to various parameters that you need, like bass and treble, filter cutoff, effects, etc. So that now gives me enough control to fully DJ in Ableton Live just as I would in any other DJ software. And that is how I arrived at my final rig for the gig. Right, so this is my setup. I have Ableton Live here in session mode, and my first two channels here are my two DJ tracks. So when I want to play a track, I just drag it in here and Ableton just loads it up. It has a handy feature actually, which is that when you import a long sample, it automatically warps it to the project tempo, but it doesn't always get it right first time. So what I've done is selected a bunch of tracks that I'm likely to play, and I've process them all for warping, so I know that they're all correct. So basically it's just a case of just dragging them into one of the tracks and then I can just hit play and start playing straight away. Each channel has an EQ and a filter on it, and those are mapped to these knobs here. So you can see this is doing the treble and this is doing the bass. I haven't mapped the mid control because you don't have to use that for DJing. Really, it's the treble and the bass that are most important. And then this bottom knob, I've knobbed this knob to a knob, which is the high pass filter. So in this example here. So I can't really show you too much of the DJing because of the wonderful rules of copyright on YouTube. But basically, this makes it really easy because it sorts out the beat matching and the tempo of every single track, so I don't have to worry about that. And that leaves me free to be a bit more creative and do some more cool stuff on the side. And that brings us neatly to the rest of this. So these next two channels here are loaded up with some dance drum kits, and I've programmed in some beats and fills that I can just use on the fly. So for example, on this one, we've got beat here, and another one with a snare, and then it goes all the way to like a full snare with hats kind of thing. And then on the other one, we can also run some cymbals, fills of different types. So then on the next track, I have a bass, and this can be adapted from anything from a innocent little sub bass all the way through to an obnoxious electro bass. So it's quite versatile, I can use it for lots of different stuff. And then the next is a synth, which goes from this all the way through to this. And I can also adjust the amount of reverb on that. And then we have a more traditional kind of brassy type synth, but it's got an added kind of sample at the beginning there, which you can actually just filter out the brass part, and then it becomes more like a little stabby type thing. So those are both quite versatile, I can use them in various different ways. Then on the next page, I have a bunch of effects. These are organized from short to long, so we've got short ones at the top and long ones at the bottom. So on one channel we have builds, and in the other channel we have drops. And you can also combine them to make a really interesting kind of effect. Pretty cool. And then I got one other little effect, which is this kind of voice effect.
Magical.
Sounds pretty lame on its own, but when you combine it with a beat, it actually sounds quite cool. In case you hadn't realised, Magical is the name of the festival. So let's do a little improvisation using what we've got here. I'll start with a bass line. Let's get some distortion on that. And yeah, here we go. Let's add a little synth line there. And now we can just build on that basically.